You are holding a chocolate bar. It costs £2. It weighs 180 grams. It has always cost £2. But 2 years ago, it weighed 200 grams. Nobody told you. The price on the shelf didn't change. The packaging looks the same. Same purple wrapper, same logo, same familiar weight of a bar you've been buying for 20 years. But there are 20 fewer grams in your hand than there used to be. This is called shrinkflation. The Office for National Statistics tracked it across British supermarkets between 2012 and 2017 and found 2,529 products that had shrunken in size without a corresponding price cut. More than 2,000 products, quietly trimmed, quietly repriced per gram. The word was coined by economist Pippa Malmgren in a Bloomberg column in September 2014. A decade later, it's an everyday conversation. Everyone knows the word. Far fewer people understand why it keeps happening. The standard explanation is that companies shrink products when costs rise. Raw materials get expensive, margins get squeezed, something has to give. That explanation is true as far as it goes, but it misses the most important part. Companies don't just shrink products to survive a cost spike. They shrink them because they have studied your psychology and they know you will barely notice. And once they've made that cut, they rarely reverse it. To understand why shrinkflation works, you need to understand what happens in your brain when you pick up a product you've bought dozens of times before. You are not a rational economic agent making a fresh calculation every time you walk down a supermarket aisle. You are running on memory. The price you remember is a specific number, £2, or £1.49, or 99p. That number is burned in. When it changes, you notice immediately. When it doesn't, you feel like nothing has changed. Researchers at Tilburg University and Southern Methodist University studied exactly this. A 1% increase in a product's price reduces sales by 1.19%, but a 1% reduction in its size reduces sales by only 0.56%. Cutting the product hurts sales roughly half as much as raising the price by an equivalent amount. The same researchers found that revenues in the year following a size reduction tend to run about 6% higher than they would have been at the prior size. Not just recovered, improved. The company absorbs a short-term consumer relations hit and comes out ahead on margin. Why the asymmetry? Price is the number you have memorized. Weight is small print on the back of the packet. You absorb the price change the moment you pick up the product. You absorb the weight change, if you absorb it at all, only if you happen to read the back, compare it to what you remember from last year, and do the arithmetic mid-aisle. Almost nobody does that. Picture the meeting room where these decisions get made. It is not a room full of villains. It is a room full of finance and marketing people staring at a spreadsheet. And on that spreadsheet, there are two options. Option 1. Raise the price. The shelf price moves from £2 to £2.22, an 11% increase, roughly what the company needs to preserve its margin against rising input costs. The number on the shelf changes. Every customer in every store sees it. The comparison websites notice. Consumers write angry social posts and photograph the old receipt next to the new one. Option 2. Reduce the bar. The price stays at £2. The bar goes from 200 grams to 180 grams. Effectively, the same 11% price increase per gram, but the number on the shelf doesn't move. The change is in the small print on the back. Most shoppers never look at the small print. The research says option 2 hurts less. Half the sales impact. Better revenues over the following year. So companies choose option 2. Not because they are malicious, but because they are making a rational choice between two levers, and the data tells them clearly which lever costs less. This is the mechanism. Not desperation. Not a last resort. A deliberate choice, backed by data, made in a room where the data points one way. The wrapper is the same. The price is the same. The gram count is quietly lower, and the margin is quietly higher. Now at a genuine crisis. In 2022, a ton of cocoa cost around $2,390. Elevated by pandemic-era disruption, but manageable. Prices the industry had budgeted around. West Africa produces the majority of the world's cocoa. In 2023, A combination of unusual rainfall, aging trees, and fungal disease hit production across Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana hard. Global output fell roughly 14% in a single season. A 478,000-ton deficit opened up. Stock levels dropped to their lowest point in 46 years. Prices responded. By the end of 2023, cocoa had risen to $3,380 per ton, up 41% on the year before. By late 2024, it peaked at $10,412 per ton. That is more than 300% in roughly 2 years. For Mondelez International, the company that owns Cadbury, Milka, and Toblerone, this was a serious input cost shock. Mondelez reported revenues of $36.4 billion in 2024, with chocolate accounting for roughly 30% of that. When a key raw material quadruples in cost, the margin calculations change fast. And so the lever got pulled. Cadbury Dairy Milk went from 200 grams to 180 grams in 2022, at the same 2-pound price point. The cost pressure was real, but the decision to shrink rather than raise the price was not forced. It was made by people who had read the research and who understood that you were more likely to notice the price than the gram count. The crisis gave them cover. The psychology gave them confidence. Here is where the story gets interesting. Cocoa prices have eased from their 2024 peak. Supply has started to stabilize. The cost shock that justified the 2022 reduction has, not fully, but meaningfully, begun to reverse. So what happened to the Cadbury bar? It is still 180 grams. The price is still roughly 2 pounds. The bar has not grown back. This is the ratchet. Shrinkflation moves in one direction. A size cut made under the cover of a cost crisis does not reverse when the crisis eases. The new baseline becomes the new normal. Consumers adjust. Memory updates. After a year or two, 180 grams is simply what a Cadbury bar is. The Toblerone case makes this visible. In 2016, Mondelez reduced the Toblerone bar. The gaps between the peaks widened. The backlash was immediate and unusually fierce, because the bar's distinctive shape made the reduction obvious in a way that a few missing grams on a standard bar isn't. Under sustained pressure, Mondelez eventually reversed the change, but the bar returned at a higher price than before the original cut. Think about what that sequence achieved. The bar shrank. The company absorbed the criticism. The bar was restored at a higher price. The ratchet doesn't just lock in the smaller size. It creates the conditions in which restoring the original feels like a favor that deserves to be paid for. The ONS study found something specific about confectionery. Between 2012 and 2017, shrinkflation added 1.22 percentage points to the effective inflation rate in that category, above and beyond the headline number being reported. What that means? The real price increase consumers were experiencing was higher than the figure appearing in the news. Inflation statistics measure price. They don't measure price per gram. A bar that costs the same but weighs 10% less is 10% more expensive in real terms, but it doesn't register in the Consumer Price Index as a price increase. The signal is muffled. This matters beyond the supermarket. Headline inflation shapes interest rate decisions, wage negotiations, the public's sense of whether life is getting more expensive. When it systematically understates what is actually happening to purchasing power, the statistics and the weekly shop start telling different stories. France was the first country to respond directly. From July 1, 2024, French supermarkets were legally required to display a label on any product reduced in size without a corresponding price cut, visible at point of sale for at least 2 months. If you want to shrink the product instead of raising the price, you have to say so. The United States introduced the Shrinkflation Prevention Act, Senate Bill 3819, in February 2024. As of this recording, it has not passed. The mechanism that makes shrinkflation effective is the same one that makes it hard to regulate. It relies on inattention. Disclosure is a light switch. The question is whether anyone actually looks up. Think about what happens if one company in a competitive market decides not to shrink when costs rise. It raises its price instead. Now picture what the shelf looks like. Brand A's bar is 200 grams and costs £2 22 pence. Brand B's bar is 180 grams and still costs £2. The shopper sees two numbers. They don't do mental arithmetic about price per gram in the cereal aisle. Nobody does. They see £2 22 pence and £2. Brand B looks cheaper. Brand A loses market share. This is why shrinkflation spreads once it starts. The first company to shrink sets a new competitive floor. Every rival now faces a binary choice: shrink and maintain apparent price parity, or hold size and look expensive. The consumer who doesn't track the gram count never knows they're being repriced across the entire category. The race to reduce size is also a race to preserve the appearance of affordability. The only way out of this dynamic is category-wide transparency. If every bar on the shelf must carry a label reading reduced from 200 grams to 180 grams, the competitive advantage of shrinking disappears. The trick only works in the dark. Disclosure requirements are the light switch. But transparency cuts both ways. The psychology that makes shrinkflation effective, anchoring on price rather than weight, is also the psychology that makes consumers resistant to acting on information. Giving someone information doesn't rewrite their habits. It just changes what they know while the habits run as before. The gap between information and behavior is exactly where shrinkflation lives. Here is what we actually know. You are holding a bar that is smaller than it used to be. The price tag says the same number. The company that made it chose this outcome over the alternative because the data told them you would accept it more readily than a price increase. The cocoa crisis was real, but Mondelez didn't shrink your chocolate bar because it had no choice. It shrank it because it already understood you would barely notice, and the crisis gave it permission to act on that understanding. When costs recover, the bar does not. This is not a scandal. It is a system. The system is optimized against your inattention, the gap between the number you have memorized and the number you haven't. It uses your own cognitive shortcuts against you, legally, efficiently, across every supermarket aisle where labels are small and habits run deep. Every economy runs on price signals. Prices communicate scarcity. Scarcity shapes demand. Demand shapes production. When those signals are muffled, when a genuine price increase is hidden inside a gram count, the signal doesn't disappear. It just becomes harder to read. The information is still there. It's in the small print. It always was. The question is not whether companies will keep doing this. They will, as long as the data says it works. The question is simpler. Which number are you looking at when you pick up the bar? The one on the front or the one on the back?